criminals. Speculation is mounting in Jamaica and across the wider Caribbean after a U.S. federal indictment against ousted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro appears to implicate Caribbean politicians in drug running and dealing in cocaine. The 25-page indictment was unsealed in the Southern District of New York over the weekend. It alleges that cocaine traffickers bribed politicians along the Caribbean route to protect drug shipments moving north toward the United States. On January 3, U.S. forces conducted a large-scale strike on Venezuelan military facilities, resulting in Maduro's capture and transport to the United States to face charges. These include narco-terrorism and cocaine importation conspiracy. Shalois Michael reports.
The indictment paints a picture of transnational corruption reaching beyond Venezuela's borders. It raises uncomfortable questions for Caribbean governance and regional security. The indictment alleges that cocaine traffickers operating from Venezuela paid Caribbean politicians to secure protection from arrest and allow the flow of cocaine to the United States. According to prosecutors, this network helped bolster corruption and political power for officials who aided traffickers. While the document does not publicly name any Caribbean-specific politician, the suggestion that elected regional leaders may have been compromised could have serious implications for regional reputations. Jamaicans and wider Caribbean observers have expressed both shock and concern at the unfolding events. Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago Kamala Persad-Bissessar raised eyebrows by reposting the damning allegations from the U.S. indictment to her social media pages. Prime Minister Persad-Bissessar has publicly supported the United States plan to deal with what he termed the illegal drugs trade. Persad-Bissessar has also criticized CARICOM's position that the Caribbean is a zone of peace. Neither the governing Jamaica Labour Party or the opposition People's National Party have yet to issue a statement on the matter. When our news center contacted both parties, they declined to speak on the record on the matter. Shalois Michael for Nationwide News.
Retired Provost at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, Professor Basil Wilson, is advising the Jamaican government to take a delicate approach in its stance on the U.S. military action in Venezuela. Professor Wilson was reacting to the arrest of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro over the weekend. He was speaking on Cliff Hughes Online on Monday. Mahira Stewart has that story.
U.S. military strikes resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia on Saturday. At least 40 people were killed in the operation. In a press conference later that day, Trump said the U.S. would run Venezuela. The Jamaican government has so far not directly commented on the developments in the South American country. Professor Wilson thinks that's a wise decision. He's urging caution.
I would say that you need the most delicate, the most diplomatic, and the most astute kind of way to deal with Donald Trump. It has become very difficult. I mean, one of the things that we're hoping is that in 2026, there's going to be midterm elections. If the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives, you might get a different kind of balance of power within the United States, where it might be much easier establishing a dialogue.
He says America's current posture indicates it intends to exert dominance in the region.
The Trump administration put out a new doctrine about their national security interests. And one of the things that they emphasize in that new portfolio is that the Western Hemisphere is in fact the backyard of the United States of America. And they're going to insist that whatever happens in this Western Hemisphere, they will be the dominant power. And in fact, the other countries will not be allowed to do so. And so what occurred recently with the kidnapping of Maduro is a manifestation of that new national security policy.
The Caribbean community, CARICOM, says it wants peaceful dialogue through diplomatic channels to ensure stability and prosperity for Venezuelans. Professor Wilson says infighting within the Caribbean has weakened what was once a strong regional voice in dealing with Washington.
Well, I think you have to deal with it. I mean, they are a superpower. Our economy depends heavily on American tourism. So we have to be quite astute. We have to be quite brave in terms of articulating what is in the best interest of Jamaica. But I think one of the things that we used to do was that CARICOM really supported a sort of organized force, a coalition that could articulate its interests and had much more clout in Washington if it were a united entity. That sort of split within CARICOM has weakened the voices of Caribbean countries.
Mahiri Stewart for Nationwide News.
Meanwhile, political economist Professor John Rapley, Professor John Rapley is raising doubts that the Trump administration is seeking to effect wholesale regime change in Venezuela. Rapley was reacting to Trump's seeming dismissal of Venezuela's opposition leader Mario Corina Machado while discussing the way forward for the South American nation following the ouster of Nicolas Maduro. Trump claimed at a press conference on Saturday that Machado did not have the support or respect of her country. Professor Rapley says Trump appears more interested in compliant Venezuelan leaders.
I think what it shows is that Trump doesn't want regime change. He wants a compliant, he basically wants a satrap in Caracas who will do his bidding. The problem with trying to put Machado on power is that she has her domestic support base, and she would not, her first priority would be to restore the oil industry to the benefit of Venezuelans, not to the benefit of the U.S. Trump wants it to be to the benefit of the U.S., and so he just needs a puppet, and he's going to find it very difficult to simply have a puppet without taking the necessary steps to actually bolster that with a major military force. And if he does that, he's going to encounter Colin Powell's famous pottery barn rule, that if you break it, you own it.
Yes.
Professor John Rapley there, political economist. He was speaking with Cliff Hughes on Monday.
In other news now, the Lawyers Christian Fellowship LCF is expressing grave concern about the number of fatal shootings by members of the security forces since the start of the year. It says the numbers so far in 2026 continues a disturbing pattern of such killings over the last 12 months. Khaleesi Wright reports.
In the first 5 days of the new year, 11 Jamaicans have been killed by the security forces. That's 8 more than the 3 killed in the corresponding period last year. That's already a 266% increase in less than a week. It was a similar story in 2025. Over those 12 months, 311 Jamaicans were killed in confrontations with the security forces. Of that number, 280 of those deaths were between January 1 and November 30. An additional 31 fatalities were recorded in December. Eileen Coley-Nicholson heads the Lawyers Christian Fellowship. She says it's concerning that eyewitness reports are often at odds with official accounts.
While we acknowledge and commend the reported reduction in murders and major crimes during 2025, this achievement is severely undermined by the significant increase in fatal encounters involving the security forces. Even more troubling is the indication that this pattern has continued into the new year, with multiple deaths reported on New Year's Day alone, including during joint police military operations. Of particular concern are reports emerging from communities where eyewitness accounts appear to contradict official statements.
In a release on Monday, the LCF stressed that the unjust taking of life, whether by criminal elements or by agents of the state acting outside the bounds of the law, is a grave moral wrong. It is therefore calling for several actions to be taken.
The LCF is calling for certain things, and we're condemning all extrajudicial killings and unlawful use of force by state agents. We're calling for prompt, independent, and transparent investigations into all fatal shootings. We support the mandatory use of body-worn cameras in all security operations. We're urging the strengthening of accountability, training, and oversight. We're calling on the church and civil society to pray and to act for justice and peace.
Indicom reported that in the first 9 months of 2025, nearly 70 members of the security forces were brought before the courts following its investigations. But in the majority of cases investigated, no charges have been laid against the security forces. Khaleesi Wright for Nationwide News.
And 3 men were fatally shot by the police in St. Tullis near Porus, Manchester on Monday. Commanding officer for the Manchester Police, Superintendent Kerry Duncan, says the confrontation happened shortly after midday.
The police, acting on information, came to this premises behind me to execute a search warrant. On the approach of the police, a group of men were seen exiting the building with firearms in hand. The police accosted the men who engaged them in a shootout. The police advanced inside the building where they were again engaged by other men inside the premises. The police again returned the fire. At the end of the shooting, 3 men were found suffering from what appeared to be gunshot injuries. All 3 men were immediately taken to the Maypen Hospital, where unfortunately they were pronounced dead.
Superintendent Duncan says the Independent Commissioner of Investigations, Indicom, is now probing the incident.
2 firearms, a shotgun and a .38 revolver recovered from the scene. Indicom and other stakeholders have been informed and the investigations have started.
Superintendent Kerry Duncan there, he heads the Manchester Police. You're listening to the news on Nationwide at 5. We'll have more after these.
See twice the style for less at IQ Optical. Buy 1 pair of glasses and get your second and third pair half price. Don't miss out. Call 876-929-7732 or visit IQ Optical today, where clarity never looked sharper.
The time by IQ Optical is...
It's 15 minutes after 5.
Termites, rodents, or birds infesting your home or office? Call Rent-A-Kill Initial, the pest expert, at 876-926-4236 for a free pest assessment island-wide. The temperature brought to you by Rent-A-Kill Initial is
24 degrees Celsius in Kingston, 25 out west in Montego Bay. Continuing the news, the Jamaica Teachers Association, JTA, is urging the government to take a more proactive approach to disaster preparedness in the education sector. The call comes amid continued weather-related disruptions of the education sector. JTA President Mark Malava made the plea during his back-to-school message on Sunday.
With another hurricane season already on the horizon, the issue of how we lead in moments of crisis can no longer be postponed. There are evident gaps in crisis leadership preparedness within the education system, and these must be addressed in a deliberate and structured manner. Accordingly, the Jamaica Teachers Association is calling on the government to commence meaningful dialogue and planning around crisis leadership and disaster preparedness in education, even as recovery efforts continue.
Just under 400 schools were impacted by Hurricane Beryl in 2024. The figure rose to nearly 700 in October last year, following the passage of Hurricane Melissa. Mr. Malava says the Category 5 system not only caused learning loss, but impacted the well-being of students and teachers. As such, the JTA president is calling for a more permanent implementation of psychosocial support in schools.
The emotional toll of recent crises has been significant, and for many, recovery is still unfolding. The Jamaica Teachers Association will therefore continue and strengthen its psychosocial support initiatives in the new year. At the same time, the JTA insists that psychosocial support provided by the Ministry of Education must not be treated as a temporary or crisis-only intervention. It must be ongoing and deliberately woven into the fabric of national recovery and school operations.
Mark Malava, president of the JTA.
To transport now, the Portfolio Minister Darrell Vaz is again calling on road users to exercise caution when traversing the nation's roadways. This follows Sunday's fiery motor vehicle crash on the Cooper Spend Main Road in the vicinity of the Royalton Hideaway Resort in Trelawney. The crash claimed the lives of 2 individuals. According to Minister Vaz, since the start of 2026, 3 persons have lost their lives in 2 collisions. He says a road safety campaign is to be launched in the first quarter of this year to help curtail the problem.
Very sad and disappointing that we're starting the new year as we ended the old year in terms of road fatalities. The hotspots are well known, and we continue to have accidents in the same areas as people are not taking caution. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to start and launch the public education campaign, National Road Safety Campaign, in the first quarter of this year, and I'm hoping and praying that that will help.
Darrell Vasley, the Transport Minister. He says the road safety call is not just about one driver or one vehicle, but rather it's a wake-up call to every operator, every motorist, and every pedestrian who uses the roads daily. In 2025, a total of 374 persons were killed in 325 fatal collisions across the island.
Chief Justice Brian Sykes is renewing his call for the government to grant the judiciary direct oversight of its own expenditure. His appeal comes amid what he described as the silence from authorities regarding the reconstruction of several court facilities damaged by the passage of Hurricane Melissa.
There is a problem. And what is the problem? The executive has not been able to respond in the time necessary for us. Because if you notice in all the discussions that have been going on about rebuilding better, bigger and better and more resilient and so on, not one word has been said about the courthouse in Black River, the courthouse in St. Elizabeth, and other courts, as if to say it is not a matter of great importance.
According to the Chief Justice, a courtroom in St. Elizabeth will have to be rebuilt. In Westmoreland, damage to the roof of a courtroom has rendered the facility unusable. As a result, cases from Westmoreland have been transferred to neighboring parishes. Chief Justice Sykes says several other courts are in need of repairs or relocation. He says the government is dragging its feet on a matter.
The time has now come for us to be given the greater control over the capital budget. And this is really in keeping with what I was told some time ago. I was invited to some meetings a couple of years ago. What we were told was that they are going to change the way in which the budgets are prepared. What did that change entail? The entities involved in service delivery would create their own budget, and they have to produce the procurement plan, the operational plan, the budget, and so it will go up into the ministry. So how do we have a situation in which the ministry still controls that significant aspect of our budget?
That's Brian Sykes, Chief Justice. He was speaking at the swearing-in ceremony for the Hillary term of the judicial year on Monday. 6 judges were sworn in.
Meanwhile, the Chief Justice says several courts will soon be accorded International Organization of Standardization, ISO certification.
This year, in roughly 12 weeks' time, the Court of Appeal of Jamaica, the Gun Court, High Court Division of the Gun Court in Kingston, the St. Thomas Parish Court, and the Court Administration Division should be ISO certified. And that is a very significant development. And then to make the point, it doesn't say that we are perfect, but what it is saying is that we are committed to establishing and maintaining a minimum standard of service to our citizens.
Brian Sykes, the Chief Justice. The certification refers to the independent assurance that courts, or rather that the court's administrative systems and processes meet the internationally recognized benchmarks set by the ISO.
The world in a minute.
Antigua and Barbuda and Dominica have signed third country arrangements with the United States to accept certain refugees who cannot be returned to their home countries. Both announcements come in the wake of a U.S. proclamation issued in December, which expanded restrictions on the entry of certain foreign nationals. The 2 countries have stressed that all arrivals will undergo strict intelligence vetting. In Antigua, Prime Minister Gaston Brown confirmed the agreement, noting that the U.S. will provide full intelligence support. In Dominica, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt confirmed a similar agreement, noting that the nation has engaged in ongoing dialogue with the U.S. on matters of mutual interest.
In international news, a defiant Nicolas Maduro declared himself the president of his country as he protested his capture in court on Monday. Maduro pleaded not guilty to the federal drug trafficking charges the Trump administration used to justify removing him from power in Venezuela. Translated by a courtroom reporter, Maduro told the court he was captured before being cut off by the judge. Asked later for his plea to the charges, he stated, quote, "I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am a decent man, the president of my country." Maduro's wife, Celia Flores, also pleaded not guilty. The courtroom appearance kicks off the U.S. government's most consequential prosecution in decades of a foreign head of state. A 25-page indictment accuses Maduro and others of working with drug cartels to facilitate the shipment of thousands of tons of cocaine into the United States. They could face life in prison if convicted. Recapping the top stories making nationwide news at this hour. Speculation mounting across the region as the U.S. indictment of Maduro accuses regional leaders of facilitating a cocaine trade from Venezuela.